A black single father walked into his own hotel a few minutes before midnight, gray hoodie, worn jeans, his 7-year-old son asleep on his shoulder, one small hand still wrapped around a stuffed dinosaur. He asked for a room. The clerk behind the desk looked him over once, slowly, and then leaned forward and said, just loud enough for the people nearby to hear, "Sir, this isn't the kind of place you can just walk into." 3 minutes later, that same clerk handed 2 keycards to a well-dressed couple who hadn't made a reservation at all. When the father asked to speak to the manager, he was warned to leave. When he sat down instead, security was called. And in a lobby full of witnesses holding up their phones, not one of them knew that the quiet man being escorted toward the door owned every inch of the marble under their feet. Before the night was over, someone was going to be fired on the spot. And that was going to be the smallest thing that happened to them. If you've ever walked into a room and been judged before you said a single word, this one is for you. Stay with me. Marcus Johnson had not planned to stop here tonight. 3 months abroad had a way of narrowing a man down to the simplest wants. A hot shower. A real bed. The sound of his son breathing steadily in the dark. His flight had landed 2 hours behind schedule, and by the time they cleared baggage claim, it was crawling toward midnight. And the thought of another 40 minutes on the highway in that condition felt less like inconvenience and more like a bad idea he could talk himself out of. So he made the decision the way he made most of them, quietly, quickly, without announcing it to anyone. He knew exactly where to go. The Grand Meridian on 5th, the flagship of Johnson Hospitality Group, the hotel that had taken him 11 years to build out of a single failing property in Charlotte into the thing it was now. He had opened this location himself. He had cut the ribbon on that marble floor, stood in this exact lobby, and told his team that this building would stand for everything he believed about how people deserve to be treated, not the ones you were trying to impress, but the ones you thought you could afford to ignore. He had not set foot in it in 4 months. And he had not called ahead. That part was deliberate. Marcus had a habit of visiting his properties unannounced. Dressed the way he was dressed right now. Gray hoodie, dark jeans, plain sneakers, no watch. Nothing on him that announced money because it was the only honest way to see what a place actually was when no one inside it was performing for the owner. A hotel on its best behavior told you nothing. A hotel at midnight, when it thought no one important was watching, told you everything. His father had taught him that, though he had never meant to. For 22 years. Marcus's father had worked the night security shift at a hotel very much like this one. He had come home in the gray hours of the morning and sat at the kitchen table for a while without speaking, not angry, just emptied. A man who needed a few minutes of quiet to become himself again after a night of being looked through. Marcus had understood it even as a boy, without having words for it. What his father had handed him was not bitterness. It was clarity. The way a place treats the people it thinks don't matter. His father had said once, tells you everything you need to know about it. Eli had fallen asleep somewhere over the ocean and had not fully surfaced since. He was 7 years old and weighed almost nothing. And after 3 months apart, Marcus would have carried him twice as far without a word of complaint. He had his mother's long lashes and his father's flat stubbornness. And at the moment he was using his father's left shoulder as a pillow, both arms hooked loosely around his neck. A worn stuffed dinosaur named Rex wedged under his chin. Marcus held him with one arm and pushed through the revolving door with the other. The lobby of the Grand Meridian was exactly as he remembered it, because he had approved every inch of it. Warm light falling across Italian marble, the low sound of jazz drifting from somewhere near the bar, a long front desk of dark mahogany, staffed at this hour by a single clerk. Every detail had been chosen to make a person feel, the instant they walked in, that they were welcome, that they belonged here before they had proven a single thing. He crossed the floor slowly, mindful of his son's weight, and stopped at the desk. The clerk was a young man, late 20s, well-groomed, wearing the Navy uniform with a precision that suggested he thought about how he looked more than most people did. His name tag read Trevor. He glanced up from his screen as Marcus approached, and something moved across his face, not open rudeness. Nothing you could have played back in slow motion and named. Just a small, quiet recalibration. The look a person's face makes when their eyes have handed their brain a conclusion it has already accepted. He took in the hoodie. He took in the sleeping child. He looked back down at his screen. Evening, Marcus said. "I need a room for tonight. One night, 2 guests. Nothing special." Trevor's eyes stayed on the monitor a beat longer than they needed to. Then he leaned forward, just slightly, and lowered his voice into that careful register people use when they want the humiliation to feel routine rather than personal. "Sir, this isn't the kind of place you can just walk into." The words settled into the space between them with a specific weight. Not shouted, not hostile, just quiet and certain. The way a thing is said when the person saying it wants it to sound less like cruelty and more like policy. 2 tables away, a woman at the lounge bar glanced over. Marcus did not look at her. He kept his eyes on Trevor. "I'm asking for a room," he said evenly. "That's all." Trevor straightened, and his tone smoothed over into something rehearsed. "I'm sorry, sir. We're fully booked tonight. No availability." Marcus did not react. He had learned, a long time ago, that the most useful thing you could do in a moment like this was nothing. That stillness gave a man room to keep talking, and a man who kept talking eventually told you the truth. "Nothing at all," he said. "I'm not asking for a suite. A standard room is fine. We just need somewhere to sleep." "Fully booked, sir." Trevor repeated it with the smooth patience of someone who had said the line before and would say it again. "I apologize for the inconvenience. There are a few other hotels in the area that might be able to help you." Marcus stood at the counter and said nothing for a moment. He looked at Trevor's face not with anger, but with the careful attention of a man writing something down in a place no one could see. Then he stepped back, unhurried, and did not leave. He shifted Eli's weight against his arm and stayed exactly where he was, a few feet from the desk, and waited, because a lie like that one never survived very long on its own. It only needed a little time. It did not take much. Barely 3 minutes later, the front door swept open behind him. A couple came through it, the man in a good blazer, the woman in a coat that had cost more than most people paid in rent for a month. They moved the way people move when rooms have always been available to them, because in their experience, rooms always were. They had no bags being checked, no reservation confirmation in hand. They were walk-ins, exactly like Marcus. Trevor's whole body changed. His shoulders lifted. His spine came up. The smile that arrived on his face was fast and easy and entirely genuine. Nothing like the flat professionalism he had aimed at Marcus. "Welcome to the Grand Meridian," he said warmly. "Do you have a reservation with us this evening?" They did not. Marcus watched the whole thing without moving. He watched Trevor tap through the same system that had, 90 seconds ago, been fully booked. He watched a standard room appear in it. He watched the card get processed, watched 2 key cards slide across the mahogany with a little flourish of hospitality, watched the couple thank him and drift toward the elevators without ever once being told that this wasn't the kind of place they could just walk into. Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered without a single word, and both men standing on either side of that desk understood it perfectly, even if only one of them would ever have admitted it out loud. He stood with it for a moment, and something in him went very quiet and very deliberate. He was not going to say who he was. Not yet. That was the harder discipline, and it was the only one that would actually tell him the truth. If this was happening here at the flagship, the property that was supposed to set the standard for every other building with his name on it, then he needed to see the whole shape of it before he did anything about it. He needed to know how far it went when no one thought there was any reason to stop. Off to the side, at the concierge desk, a young woman had gone still. Her name tag read, Maya. She had watched the couple get their room, and she had watched the man in the gray hoodie watch it too, and though her hand stayed flat on the paperwork in front of her, they had stopped moving entirely. She said nothing. She was not the kind of person, in the structure she worked inside, who got to say anything, but Marcus saw her see it, and he filed that away with everything else. He thought, without wanting to, about his father at the kitchen table in the gray morning light, not speaking. He wondered what happened to the things a man built once he handed them to other people to run. Against his shoulder, Eli stirred. His voice came out small and half asleep, muffled in the fabric of the hoodie. "Daddy, are we at the hotel yet?" Marcus tightened his arm around his son and pressed his hand gently against the boy's back. "We're here, buddy," he said quietly. "Just give me one more minute." He turned back to the desk. When he spoke, his voice was calm, the way very still water is calm, not because nothing is moving underneath it, but because whatever is moving has not yet decided to come up to the surface. "I'd like to speak with your manager on duty," he said. "Please." Trevor's smooth expression flickered for the first time. Whatever he had expected the man in the hoodie to do, it had not been this, a quiet, specific request, delivered without heat, impossible to wave off with a line about availability. He covered the flicker quickly, picked up the desk phone, and made a short, low call. Then he set it down and did not meet Marcus's eyes again. Marcus waited. He looked around the lobby while he did at the guests in the low lounge chairs. At Maya, still frozen at the concierge desk with her hands flat on the counter. At the soft light and the marble and the jazz that was still playing near the bar, as if the room were exactly what it had been built to be. He had made this place to feel like a sanctuary. He held his sleeping son a little closer and waited to see who would come. The manager arrived within 2 minutes. His name tag read Richard, and he was somewhere in his mid-40s. The kind of man who wore a full suit at midnight because he understood authority as something you maintained through surfaces. He had clearly been briefed before he crossed the floor, because he did not arrive with an open mind. He arrived with a conclusion already drawn. And everything he did after that was in service of it. "Sir," Richard said. And as he spoke, he positioned himself beside Trevor, a small, deliberate movement that made the geometry of the room unmistakable. 2 of them on one side of the desk, Marcus on the other, his son asleep on his shoulder. "I understand there's been some confusion. My clerk has already explained that we don't have availability tonight, and I'm afraid there's nothing further we can do for you." "There's no confusion," Marcus said. "I watched your clerk tell me you were fully booked, and then, 3 minutes later, book a room for a couple who walked in off the street with no reservation. I'm asking you to explain that to me." Something in Richard's face closed. The way a position hardens the moment it's challenged by someone it has already decided not to respect. "My staff exercise their professional judgment," he said, "and I stand behind it." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "Your professional judgment," he repeated, not a question. He let the phrase sit in the air, turning it over, letting Richard hear the shape of it. And here he made a choice, though no one in the room could have seen him make it. Every instinct he had the 11 years, the ribbon he'd cut on this floor, the promise he'd made his own staff standing in this exact spot, pulled toward one sentence that would have ended the entire thing in 3 seconds. "Do you know who I am?" He did not say it. He had learned, from a father who had spent 22 years being decided about before he opened his mouth, that the truth about a place only ever showed itself when the people running it believed there would be no cost. He wanted the whole shape of it. He was going to have to let it get worse to see it. "I'd like your full name and your exact title," Marcus said instead. "For the record." The phrase "for the record" landed with a small, specific weight, and for the briefest instant something crossed Richard's face that might have been caution. It came and went. He gave both, without warmth, the way you'd hand documents to a man you expected never to see again. Marcus took them in the way he took in everything quietly, completely, without making a show of it. Then he stepped back from the desk, found a chair in the lounge a little apart from the other guests, and sat down. He settled Eli against his chest, tucked Rex more securely under the boy's chin, and went still. He was not leaving. He was not arguing. He was simply, calmly, refusing to disappear the way he was supposed to, and he watched, over the top of his son's head, to see what a man like Richard did when the problem he'd decided to remove declined to remove itself. He did not have to wait long. Richard did not go back to wherever managers went at midnight. He stationed himself near the front desk with his arms crossed and watched Marcus the way a man watches something he has decided is a problem, but hasn't yet worked out how to get rid of. Every so often his eyes tracked across the lobby to the chair where Marcus sat with Eli sleeping against him, and each time they carried the same silent message. "You're still here. I would very much prefer that you weren't." Marcus noticed all of it. He noticed Richard lean in and murmur something to Trevor that made the younger man straighten his spine. He noticed Maya at the concierge desk, keeping her eyes fixed carefully on the surface in front of her, her hands no longer even pretending to work. He noticed the 2 guests at the lounge bar go quieter over several minutes. their attention drifting toward him without quite committing to it. The lobby had taken on a specific kind of tension, the kind that forms when a room full of people can feel that something is wrong and are each waiting, for their own private reasons, for someone else to be the one to name it. Marcus had felt that tension before. Not here. Not in a building with his name on the deed, but in enough rooms across enough years to recognize the exact shape of it the instant it formed. It was the quiet of people who knew something unfair was happening and had each decided, separately, that it was not their place to say so. He shifted his son's weight and kept watching, and something in him grew heavier and more certain. The way it had the night his father first explained the world to him without meaning to. Richard made his move eventually. He crossed the lobby with the measured stride of a man performing authority rather than possessing it, and stopped a few feet from Marcus's chair, and spoke in the lowered voice people use when they want to sound discreet while making sure the room still hears them. "Sir, I've given you some time, and I'm going to be straightforward with you. This is a private establishment. We've told you we can't accommodate you tonight, and continuing to occupy the lobby after being informed of that isn't something we're prepared to allow." Marcus looked up at him, unhurried. "I'm sitting in a chair," he said, "in a hotel lobby. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't disturbed anyone. I haven't done a single thing that gives you grounds to make me leave." "I'm not asking," Richard said. Something in the room shifted. One of the guests at the bar set down a glass. Maya's head lifted a fraction and then lowered again. Marcus looked at Richard's face at the certainty in it, the complete and untroubled confidence of a man who had never once in his life seriously entertained the possibility that he might be wrong, and felt that older, heavier thing settle in his chest. Not anger, something slower and more deliberate than anger, and far more patient. He could have ended it there, too. He didn't. "Then call security," Marcus said quietly. "I'd like this to be official." For half a second, Richard hesitated, thrown by a man asking to be removed rather than fighting it. Then his jaw set, and he turned and gave a short nod toward the far end of the lobby, where two security guards had apparently been waiting for exactly this signal. They were both large men, and they crossed the marble with the patient heaviness of people who did this often and had stopped feeling much about it. They took up positions on either side of Marcus's chair with the easy coordination of a maneuver they had run many times before. One on his left, one on his right, close enough to make the meaning of it clear to everyone watching. And everyone was watching now. The pretense had thinned out entirely. The two guests at the bar had turned fully toward him. The couple who had gotten their room had paused near the elevators instead of getting into it. And around the edges of the lounge, without fuss, without anyone lifting a device over their head to make a spectacle of it, phones had begun to appear angled low against expensive coats. Screens turned toward the center of the room, small red recording lights blinking like eyes that had decided, one by one, to open. Marcus registered them the way he registered everything. He was not thinking about how the footage would look, though he understood, with the part of his mind that never fully switched off, exactly what it would look like: a black man in a gray hoodie, a sleeping child on his shoulder, two security guards flanking his chair, and a manager standing over him whose face had already decided how this ended. He had built this lobby to be the safest room a tired person could walk into. He sat in the middle of it now with his son and two guards and a slow, cold clarity. And he waited to see how much further Richard was willing to take a thing he did not yet understand he was building brick by brick, in front of 100 cameras against himself. Richard's patience had run all the way out. "This has gone on long enough," he said, and his voice dropped the last of its hospitality. He looked at the guards. "Please, escort them out." The guard on the left moved first. Marcus felt the shift of the man's weight, the shadow of him coming closer, and he began, slowly and carefully, to gather himself and his son to stand, not to comply, but because he was not going to let his boy wake to a stranger's hands anywhere near him. And that was the moment Eli woke up. He came awake the way small children do, not gradually, but all at once, his eyes opening into full alertness and taking in the whole of the scene in a single sweep. The bright lobby, the two large men standing over the chair, the tension locked into his father's shoulders, Richard's face, hard and close. Eli sat up straighter against Marcus's arm, pulled Rex tight against his chest, and looked at the two strangers flanking them with the frank, unguarded attention of a boy who has not yet learned to pretend he doesn't see what he plainly sees. Then he looked directly at Richard. "Why do you want us to leave?" he asked. His voice was clear and unhurried, pitched at the ordinary volume of a child who does not yet know that some questions are supposed to be whispered. It carried further than he meant it to across the lounge to the two guests at the bar, over to the couple still paused by the elevators, to Maya at the concierge desk. Richard did not answer him. He looked at Marcus instead, which was its own kind of answer, and everyone in the room understood it as one. Eli looked at his father, then back at Richard, working the thing through with the slow, serious patience of a 7-year-old who takes questions seriously and expects the world to make sense if he thinks about it hard enough. "It's a hotel," he said, more to himself than to anyone, the way children reason out loud. "A hotel is where people sleep when they're tired." He looked up at Richard again. "We're tired. So why won't you let us? Isn't that the whole thing you're for?" There was no accusation anywhere in it. That was what made it land the way it did. A grown man's challenge could be argued with, deflected, reframed. But a child's plain question, asked sincerely in a quiet room, has nowhere for a lie to hide. It simply set the facts down on the marble floor where everyone could see them, and waited. The room did not recover quickly. The couple by the elevators had both turned fully now. The guests at the bar had stopped pretending to look anywhere else. Even the guard on Marcus's left, the larger of the two. The one who did this for a living shifted his weight in a way that suggested some part of him had just become aware of exactly where he was standing and did not like it. Maya had gone completely still, her eyes fixed on a single point on the counter in front of her. And something in her face had the particular tightness of a person hearing out loud the thing she had been unable to say for the last 20 minutes. Marcus looked down at his son. When he spoke, his voice was level and warm, the voice he used when he needed Eli to understand that the disorder of the world was not the boy's fault and never had been. "You didn't do anything wrong, Eli," he said. "Not one thing. You hear me?" Eli studied his father's face, found whatever he was looking for there, and nodded, and hugged Rex a little tighter. Marcus held his gaze a beat longer, and then he straightened and turned back to Richard. And here was the moment the whole night pivoted on. Though only one man in the room understood it as it happened, Richard's face had changed. The certainty was still there, but under it now was something rawer. And it was not doubt. It was the specific, dangerous irritation of a man who has felt a room turn against him and does not know how to turn it back. The boy's question had drawn every eye to him. It had exposed, in the plainest possible language, the thing he had spent 20 minutes dressing up as policy. And Richard was the kind of man who, when he felt control slipping through his fingers, did not loosen his grip and reconsider. He tightened it. He reached for the one thing that had always worked before, which was more force. He should have stopped. If he had simply gone quiet in that moment, if he had let the child's question sit and taken half a breath, the night would have ended as an ugly misunderstanding, survivable, correctable. Instead, humiliated in front of a lobby full of witnesses and 100 blinking phones, Richard Whitmore decided to win, and every single thing he did from that point forward, he did to himself. "That's enough of this," he said, and his voice had gone loud now, loud enough to fill the whole lobby and reach every recording device in it. "I've been more than patient. This man came in here after midnight. He's refused to leave when repeatedly asked, and he's now creating a scene in front of our guests and frightening my staff." He half-turned toward the room, performing for it, building his version out loud in real time. "For all I know, he's been drinking. I'm not going to stand here and let this escalate." Marcus said nothing. He watched Richard talk, and something behind his eyes went very still and very cold, because he understood with the part of him that had sat through his father's silences and learned to read the machinery under things exactly what Richard was doing. He was constructing a record. He was narrating a version of events, out loud, for the phones, in which a calm man asking for a room became a drunk man causing a disturbance, so that whatever came next would look, on paper, like a reasonable response to a threat instead of what it actually was. The only problem, and Richard could not see it, because men like Richard never could. Right up until the moment it was too late, was that there were 100 cameras in that lobby recording the difference between the man he was describing and the man who was actually sitting there. A boy with a stuffed dinosaur. A father who had not once raised his voice. Every word Richard spoke to protect himself was another word that would, very soon, be played back against him. Then Richard did the thing that turned a bad night into an unrecoverable one. He pulled out his phone, and in front of the whole room, he called the police. "Yes, I need officers at the Grand Meridian on 5th, he said, loud and clear, his eyes never leaving Marcus. "We have a male refusing to leave the premises, becoming aggressive, possibly intoxicated, with a child present. I'd like him removed." He listened for a moment. "Yes, as soon as possible." A murmur moved through the lounge. One of the guests at the bar looked at another and mouthed something. Maya's head came up all the way now, her hands lifting off the counter. The couple by the elevators had not moved. Everyone in the room had just watched a hotel manager call the police on a man sitting quietly in a chair with his sleeping son, and everyone in the room, except Richard, seemed to understand at some level that a line had just been crossed that no apology was going to walk back. Marcus looked at Richard for a long, quiet moment. He did not stand. He did not argue. He did not say the sentence that would have ended it. Instead, without hurry, he reached into the pocket of his hoodie and took out his own phone. He found a number. He pressed call. He brought it to his ear. The call lasted less than a minute. He did not lower his voice, exactly, but he spoke evenly enough that the words did not carry across the room 4 short sentences, calm and specific, the tone of a man giving instructions he had given many times before and knew would be followed. Whoever was on the other end did not need much. Marcus listened for perhaps 10 seconds. Then he said a single word Maya was close enough to catch now and ended the call, and slid the phone back into his pocket and rested his hand on his son's shoulder as though nothing at all had happened. 2 calls were racing toward that lobby now. One had gone out to the police, summoned by a manager to remove a man from a chair. The other had gone somewhere no one in the room could see, made by a man in a gray hoodie whose name none of them knew. Only one of those calls was going to matter, and the wrong people were about to find out which. Eli tugged gently on his father's sleeve, his voice small, just for the 2 of them. "Daddy, do we have to go?" Marcus looked down at him. Something in his face had settled into a certainty so complete it was almost gentle. "No, buddy," he said. "We're not going anywhere tonight." Richard heard it and took a step forward. His patience burned all the way down to nothing. "Sir, I am telling you for the last time to get up and—" The elevator chimed. It was a small sound, the kind the lobby made dozens of times a night without a single person noticing. But every person in that room noticed this one. It cut through Richard's sentence and left it unfinished, hanging in the air, and as one. The whole lounge turned toward the bank of elevators at the far side of the marble, where the doors were beginning, slowly, to slide open. A man stepped out of the elevator, and behind him came 2 more. The first was older, silver-haired. In a dark suit he had clearly pulled on in a hurry, the collar not quite straightened. A man who had been asleep or nearly so a very short time ago. The 2 behind him were younger, in suits of their own, and all 3 of them moved with the particular contained urgency of people who understand precisely the weight of what they are walking into and are trying not to run. Nobody in the lobby knew who they were, but the room felt the change in air pressure the way a room does when something important enters it, and the tension that had been coiling all night shifted into something new and uncertain. Richard's unfinished sentence still hung in the air. He turned toward the elevators along with everyone else, and the first flicker of unease crossed his face, not understanding yet. Just the animal awareness that the situation had acquired a variable he had not accounted for. The silver-haired man crossed the marble floor directly toward Marcus. He did not glance at the front desk. He did not look at Richard, or at Trevor, or at the 2 security guards standing over the chair. He walked to the man in the gray hoodie with the sleeping child, and he stopped in front of him, and he inclined his head with a formality that carried real weight. "Mr. Johnson," he said. "I'm sorry you were kept waiting." The words were quiet. They should not have carried, but the lobby had gone so still that they reached every corner of it, and the meaning of them began to move through the room like cold water finding its level. Mr. Johnson, an apology. From a man in a suit at midnight to the man everyone in that lobby had just spent 20 minutes watching be refused a room, threatened with removal, and reported to the police. At the front desk, Trevor's face began to lose its color. Richard had not moved, but something behind his eyes had started, very rapidly, to recalculate. The silver-haired man straightened and turned to face the desk, and when he spoke again his voice was even, and the evenness of it was somehow far worse than shouting would have been. "For anyone in this room who does not know," he said, "this is Marcus Johnson. He is the founder and the sole owner of Johnson Hospitality Group." He let it sit for the length of one breath. "He owns this hotel. He owns the desk you're standing behind. He owns the chairs you've had your guests sitting in, and the uniforms you're wearing, and the contracts that decide whether any of you still work here in the morning." The sentence landed on the lobby like a dropped tray. Trevor made a small sound and put both hands flat on the mahogany counter, as if he had suddenly needed it to hold himself upright. The two security guards, without being told, stepped back from Marcus's chair, an instinctive, involuntary movement, the body creating distance from a situation that had just fundamentally changed shape underneath them. One of the guests at the bar breathed out a low word, and Richard stood exactly where he was, in the middle of his own lobby floor, with the particular frozen stillness of a man whose entire understanding of the last half hour has just been demolished and rebuilt, and who has not yet worked out how he is supposed to stand inside the new version of it. Marcus said nothing yet. He had not moved from his chair. He sat with his son against his shoulder and looked at the room, taking it in the way he took in everything, not with triumph, not with the satisfaction of a man who has just won something, but with the slow, complete attention of a man taking inventory of exactly what had happened and exactly who each person in the room had chosen to be when they thought it cost them nothing. Eli looked up at the silver-haired man. Then he looked at his father. Then back at the man in the suit, turning it over with the same serious, methodical attention he brought to everything, working out the shape of what he had just heard. He tugged once on his father's sleeve. "Daddy," he whispered, though the room was quiet enough now that the whisper reached farther than he knew. "Do you know this man?" And for the first time since they had pushed through the revolving door 2 hours before, something in Marcus's face softened all the way through. The stillness he had been holding since the moment Trevor first looked him over eased, just slightly, the way a held breath eases. He put his arm around his son and drew him in close against his side, and he looked down at the boy with the stuffed dinosaur, and the corner of his mouth moved. "Yeah, buddy," he said quietly. "I know this man." The silver-haired man, his name was Thomas Webb, and he was the chief executive of Johnson Hospitality Group. And he had run the length of the executive floor and taken the first elevator down the instant a phone call reached him 4 minutes earlier from a man in a gray hoodie who had said 4 short sentences and one final word, allowed himself, for just a moment, the smallest and most tired of smiles. Then it was gone, and he stepped back, and the room belonged to Marcus again. For a long moment, nobody moved. That was the thing Marcus noticed most in the seconds after Thomas finished speaking, the total absence of motion in a room that, only minutes before, had been building towards something loud and certain. Richard in the center of the floor, Trevor gripping the counter, the guards a careful distance away now, hands loose at their sides. The expressions of men who had just understood that they had followed the wrong order in front of 100 witnesses. Even the guests who had been recording had lowered their phones a few inches, caught between the instinct to keep documenting and the sense that whatever was happening now was too large for a screen to sit between them and it. Richard found his voice first, which was either brave or foolish, and was, in this case, probably both. "Mr. Johnson," he said, and the words came out fast. "I want to explain we had no way of knowing the circumstances. We couldn't have..." Each sentence started with confidence and ran out of it before it reached the end. He was not, strictly speaking, lying. He truly had not known who Marcus was, but Marcus had spent enough of his life in enough rooms to understand the thing that Richard, somewhere underneath all his scrambling, understood too, that not knowing was not the same as not being responsible, and that this was, in fact, the entire point. The whole case against Richard was built precisely on the fact that he had not known. He had not known. And so he had shown Marcus exactly what he did to a man he was free to dismiss, which was why none of his sentences could find their endings. Marcus let him talk. He did not interrupt, did not change his expression, did not give Richard anything to push against or cling to. He simply listened, patient and unmoving, until the words ran all the way out and Richard stood there with nothing left to say and the silence closed over him. Only then did Marcus stand. He rose slowly, carefully, keeping Eli tucked against his side, and he handed Rex back into the boy's arms. And he looked at the manager across the quiet floor of the lobby he had built. He opened his mouth to speak. And that was when the front doors of the Grand Meridian swung open, and the cold night air rolled in across the marble, and 2 uniformed police officers stepped through the entrance summoned, 20 minutes earlier, by Richard Whitmore himself, to remove a dangerous man from the premises. For 1/2 second, something like relief moved across Richard's face. He had called them. They had come. Some part of him, even now, still believed the men in uniform were arriving on his side. They were not. And the reason why had already been set in motion by 4 quiet sentences and a single word. Now that Richard had watched Marcus speak into a phone and had been too certain of his own power to understand, the 2 officers came a few steps into the lobby and stopped, taking the room in the way trained people do, reading the geography of it before committing to a version of events. And the geography did not match the call they had been sent to answer. They had been dispatched to a disturbance, an aggressive, possibly intoxicated man refusing to leave, a child at risk. What they found was a lobby gone completely silent, a man in a gray hoodie standing calmly with a 7-year-old and a stuffed dinosaur, a manager frozen in the center of the floor, a company's chief executive at the man's side, and 100 phones held low, still recording. Nothing in the room was on fire except the thing no one had said out loud yet. Richard moved toward them fast, relief and authority pulling his voice back up. "Officers, thank you. This is the individual. He's refused to leave. He's been aggressive with my staff." And, "Which staff?" the older officer asked. Not unkindly. "Just precisely." Richard opened his mouth and found that the honest answer to the question was a problem. No one had been touched. No one had been threatened. The only raised voice in 2 hours of footage was his own. Thomas Webb stepped forward before Richard could assemble something. "Officers, I'm Thomas Webb, chief executive of the company that owns this hotel. Our general counsel is on the line and on her way now." He said it evenly, the way a man says a thing he wants entered accurately into the record. "I want to be very clear on behalf of the company about what actually happened here tonight, because a report was made to you that does not match it, and there is video, a great deal of video." That was the moment the machinery Richard had built all night finished turning, and turned on him. Because Marcus's quiet call, the 4 sentences, the single word "now" had not gone to a friend or a favor or a threat. It had gone to the general counsel of Johnson Hospitality Group, made the instant Marcus watched Richard lift a phone and lie to an emergency dispatcher. And the counsel had told him what Marcus already knew, that the most dangerous thing in the room was no longer the manager's cruelty. It was the false report. Because cruelty was a firing. But telling police that a calm man was a drunk and aggressive threat, inventing a crime to justify removing someone you'd decided didn't belong, that was not a matter of hospitality policy. That had a name and a statute. And it did not go away when the manager apologized. The older officer looked from Thomas to Marcus to the frozen manager, and then out at the sea of raised phones, and something in his posture settled into a different kind of alertness. "Sir," he said to Richard, "did you place the 911 call?" Richard's certainty was gone now. All of it. Drained out through the soles of his polished shoes. I believed, at the time, that—" "That's a yes," the officer said. He glanced at his partner. Nobody in that lobby needed the sentence finished to understand that the man who had called the police to remove a threat had just become the only person in the room a police report was going to be written about. Nobody had done that to Richard. That was the part he would turn over in his mind for a long time afterward, in the quiet that came later. No one had trapped him or provoked him or pushed him toward the edge. Marcus had not raised his voice once. The old man's whole revenge, if you could even call it that, had been to sit in a chair and refuse to disappear, and to let Richard keep choosing, out loud, in front of 100 cameras, exactly who he was going to be. Richard had built the entire thing himself, brick by brick, the refusal, the removal, the fabrication, the call, and handed himself the bill at the end of it. Marcus let the officers do their work. Only when there was a pause did he step forward, Eli's hand in his, and cross the quiet floor to where Richard stood. "You didn't know who I was," Marcus said. His voice carried across the lobby without effort, because everything else had gone so still. "You keep coming back to that, like it's the thing that saves you. It isn't. It's the thing that convicts you. Because everything you did tonight, you did to a man you thought you were free to do it to. You looked at a hoodie and a tired kid and you decided we weren't worth the standard, not because of anything I said, not because of anything I did, but because of what I looked like when I walked through that door." He paused. "And then you did it in front of my son." Richard said nothing. There was nothing left in him to say. "My father worked the night desk at a hotel like this one for 22 years, Marcus went on, and his voice never rose. He came home every morning carrying the weight of being looked through by people who decided, before he opened his mouth, that he didn't matter. I built this company so that the person standing in front of your desk gets treated with dignity before they've proven a single thing to you. Not after you've checked their clothes, not after you've decided they belong. Before." He held Richard's eyes. "You didn't just fail a guest tonight. You failed every person who's ever walked through a door like this one and been made to feel like less. And you did it in front of a 7-year-old who asked you, in plain words, why?" Richard tried, one last time, to find a sentence. It didn't survive the leaving of his mouth. "Richard," Marcus said quietly, "you're terminated. Effective now." He looked at Thomas, who gave a single nod and stepped aside to make it official. Richard's face settled into something gray and inward. Whatever he still had in him, he chose not to spend it. He straightened his jacket once, the small, automatic gesture of a man trying to preserve the last unbroken piece of himself, and walked toward the back office to wait for the officers, and did not look at anyone as he went. Trevor was next. Marcus crossed to the front desk slowly, giving the young man time to understand what was coming. Trevor looked as though he had not drawn a full breath in several minutes, his jaw tight, his eyes carrying the particular shine of someone working hard to hold himself together. Marcus stopped at the counter and looked at him, not with warmth, exactly, but not with the edge he'd turned on Richard, either. "You made a choice tonight based on how a man looked," he said. "And then you made the opposite choice. 3 minutes later, for a couple who looked the way you thought people in this lobby were supposed to look. I want you to sit with that. Not with what it cost you tonight, with what it actually is. What it feels like to be on the other side of it." Trevor's throat worked. "Sir, I'm not ending your career here," Marcus said, and something in Trevor's face broke open at that, relief and shame arriving in the same breath. "But you're going into a retraining program, not skills, values. You're going to spend real time understanding what this work is, and who it's for, and what that desk means to the person standing on the other side of it. If you come out the other end and still want to be here, the door is open." He held the young man's gaze. "But tonight does not happen again. Not here. Not to anyone. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," Trevor said. It was quiet, but it was real. "I understand." Marcus turned and walked to the concierge desk, where Maya had stood motionless through all of it, her hands flat on the counter, her expression carrying the specific tension of a person waiting to learn whether she was about to be swept up in the punishment for something she hadn't done. He stopped in front of her and lowered his voice so that it was only for her. "You saw it," he said. "From the first minute. You knew something was wrong, and the way this place was built, you didn't feel like you could say so. I understand exactly why. That's not a failure in you. That's a failure in the people who built the room so that the person who saw the truth had no power to act on it. That's on leadership. That's on me." Maya opened her mouth, and he went on before she could apologize for something that was never hers to carry. "But I watched you tonight," Marcus said. "I watched you track every second of it. I watched something in you recognize where the line was, even when the structure here made sure you couldn't cross it. That matters more than you know. Starting tomorrow, you're moving into a supervisory role in guest services because I need people in positions where they can actually act on what they already know is right. I have plenty of people who follow the rules. I need the ones who can see. Maya looked at him for a moment, and her expression moved through several things before it settled into something that lived between relief and resolve. I won't let you down, she said. I know, Marcus said simply. That's the whole reason I'm asking. Marcus turned back to face the room. The guests who remained were watching him openly now. No pretense, no phones raised, just people waiting to hear what came next. He spoke without preamble, the way he had learned to speak when the thing he needed to say did not improve with decoration. I've been building hotels for a long time, he said, and there's exactly one standard I have never once been willing to negotiate on. Every person who walks through our doors gets treated with respect, not based on what they're wearing, not based on what they look like, not based on whether they seem to whoever happens to be standing at the desk that night, like the kind of person who belongs in a place like this. Every person. Every time. No exceptions. He looked around the lobby slowly at the desk, at the bar, at the marble floor beneath his feet. The floor his own father had spent 22 years working near and had never once been allowed to cross as anything other than staff. If there's anyone here who can't stand behind that, Marcus said, I would genuinely rather you find somewhere else to work, not as a threat, just as the truth of what this company is. The room held the words, and then, into the quiet, came a small voice from just beside him. Eli had stood through the entire thing with Rex tucked under one arm and the earnest, focused expression of a 7-year-old determined to understand the world correctly. He looked up at his father now and tugged once on his hand. Daddy, he said, can we get our room now? I'm really tired. It moved through the lobby like something set loose, not quite laughter, but the thing that stands next to it. The sound a room full of people makes when a long-held tension finally finds a door to leave through. Even Thomas Webb pressed his lips together against a smile. Marcus looked down at his son, at the earnest face and the worn stuffed dinosaur and the complete, uncomplicated sincerity of him, and felt the thing that had been sitting in his chest for 2 hours finally shift, not vanish. Just move into something with more room in it. Yeah, buddy, he said. Let's get our room. By morning, the night had already outrun the walls of the building. No one from the company put it there. That was the part that mattered. It went out the way these things go out now, 100 phones in a single lobby, 100 angles on the same 2 hours, uploaded before Marcus had even gotten his son to sleep upstairs. By sunrise, the clips had been stitched together and captioned and shared past the point where anyone could have called it back. People watched a manager tell a tired man he wasn't the kind of person who could just walk in. They watched him book a room for a couple who walked in off the street 90 seconds later. They watched him call the police on a 7-year-old and his father. And they watched a man in a plain gray hoodie turn out to own the marble under all of it. The internet did what it does. It was merciless. And it was not wrong. The consequences did not arrive as a single blow. They arrived as a series of separate ones, each finding its own address. Richard Whitmore's ending had the least to do with anyone but himself. The termination was the smallest part of it. The false report he had made to a 911 dispatcher, the invented crime. The drunk and aggressive man who existed nowhere except in his own attempt to justify what he'd already decided to do, became a matter for the same officers he had called to save him. He spent the following weeks learning, slowly and expensively, the difference between a firing and a filing. His name traveled through the hospitality industry the way a warning travels. That's the manager from the Grand Meridian, the one who called the cops on the owner and his kid. No serious property in the city returned his calls. He had spent a career maintaining authority through surfaces, and in one night he had shown, on 100 cameras, that there was nothing underneath the suit but a man who mistook cruelty for standards. The 2 security guards, facing questions of their own about their part in it, did the arithmetic fast and told the truth that they had been ordered into position and had followed the order, and that something in the room had told them the order was wrong, even as they obeyed it. The recordings backed every word. They kept their footing by finally saying, on the record, what they should have said in the lobby. Trevor did the retraining. He could have treated it as a box to check, a humiliation to survive and forget. He didn't. Something about a 7-year-old asking him, in plain words, whether helping people wasn't the whole point of the job had lodged somewhere it wouldn't come loose. He came out the other side quieter and better at the work, the way people sometimes do when they are handed the rare gift of seeing themselves clearly and given a second chance to become someone else. And Maya became the thing the night had revealed she already was. 3 months later, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, a family came through the revolving doors of the Grand Meridian. 2 tired parents dressed for comfort rather than for impressions. 2 kids trailing behind them, one of them dragging an overstuffed backpack and refusing all help with the absolute conviction of a child who has decided this is a matter of principle. Maya was at the front of the house when they came in. She crossed the lobby to meet them before they reached the desk, introduced herself by name, and asked how she could make their stay easy. She did not glance at their luggage or their shoes. She looked at them, at the tired eyes and the stubborn kid, and she smiled the way people smile when they actually mean it. Within 2 minutes, the parents' shoulders had come down. Within 5, even the boy with the backpack had let someone carry it. The company changed the thing that had made the whole night possible in the first place. The policy that had let a guest be judged, refused, and reported on a single employee's say-so was torn out at the root. In its place went a written rule: no guest searched, removed, or refused on one person's word, ever, and Thomas Webb had a copy of it framed and hung by the front desk of every property in the group, where everyone standing behind the counter would have to see it every day. And in the far corner of that same lobby, 3 months on, Marcus stood with Eli beside him. He had come for a scheduled visit this time, in a jacket instead of a hoodie. Though Eli had still brought Rex, they had been there 10 minutes. And Marcus had not announced himself to the floor, because he wanted to see this first, just the ordinary work of the place, the everyday version of the thing he had spent his whole life trying to build. Eli watched Maya lead the tired family toward the desk. He watched the kids light up at something she said. Then he looked up at his father. "Is that what it's supposed to look like?" he asked. Marcus watched the family settle, watched the parents exhale, watched the boy with the backpack finally set it down. "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly what it's supposed to look like." Eli considered this with the quiet thoroughness he brought to most things. Then he nodded once, tucked Rex under his arm, and reached up to take his father's hand. Marcus held it, and the 2 of them stood in the corner of the lobby he had built, watching it finally become what he had always meant it to be. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. The story you just heard is made up. Marcus, Eli, Richard, the Grand Meridian. None of it is real, but the feeling at the center of it is as real as anything gets. The experience of walking into a room and being measured before you've said a single word. Being decided about because of a hoodie, or a face, or a tired kid on your shoulder. That part isn't fiction. It happens every single day, to real people, in real rooms. And most of the time, there is no CEO stepping off an elevator. There is no quiet man who turns out to own the building. There's no phone call that changes everything, no 100 cameras, no perfect ending. Most of the time, the person being treated like Marcus just has to absorb it and walk back out into the night and go find somewhere else to sleep. So the real test was never Richard's. It was everyone else's. The guests who watched and said nothing. The ones who recorded but didn't step in. The people who could feel that something was wrong and decided, each for their own quiet reasons, that it wasn't their place to say so. Because that's the part of the story we actually get to choose, not in a fictional lobby, but in our own rooms. In the ordinary moments when someone in front of us is being made to feel like less. So let me ask you honestly, if you'd been standing in that lobby before anyone knew who Marcus was, before the elevator chimed, before any of it, would you have said something, or would you have stayed quiet and watched? Be honest. Tell me in the comments. I read them. And if this one stayed with you, do me a favor, like it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe. Because we tell stories like this one every week. Stories about the quiet people the world underestimates. And the moment it finds out it was wrong. Never measure a person by what they're wearing when they walk through the door. The richest soul in the room is almost never the loudest one. Sometimes it's a tired father in a gray hoodie, holding a sleeping kid and a stuffed dinosaur, asking only to be treated like he belongs the way every single one of us always should be.